What matters? What really matters? On Uncommon Knowledge today, Ben Sasse. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Benjamin Eric Sasse grew up in Plainville, Nebraska, population today of about 1,250, earned his undergraduate degree at Harvard and a doctorate in history at Yale. He represented Nebraska in the United States Senate from 2014 until 2023, when he became president of the University of Florida, a role in which he served until the middle of 2024. This past December, Ben Sasse posted an announcement on X, quote, "This is a tough note to write, but since a bunch of you have started to suspect something, I'll cut to the chase. Last week I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer." Senator Sasse has now begun treatment at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Ben, you've begun treatment. You've also taken up a position at the American Enterprise Institute here in Washington. You're here in Washington for a friend's wedding. You're recording a podcast. Instead of withdrawing from the world, you are throwing all that you have left into it. How come?
Well, first of all, my friend Peter, good to be with you. Thank you for having me. Let's be clear, I would like to be throwing a lot more energy at it, and I'm withdrawing a lot because I sleep like 15 or 16 hours a day. So I'll just acknowledge the embarrassment at how unproductive I am, but I'm on a lot of morphine.
You just had a piece in the Wall Street Journal 3 days ago.
It was written on morphine, and I think you can see that it's a drug-addled piece. The Super Bowl party as the basis for American civics going forward. I mean, we'll talk about big stuff, and we'll talk about hopefully some gallows humor. Our family is getting through a lot of this. When you get a already metastasized cancer diagnosis that says you have cancer in 5 kinds of organs already, you tend to be a little more honest and blunt. So hopefully we can make jokes too.
Can I just ask right there? Pancreatic cancer, it seems to be this is the layman's crudest possible understanding, but it doesn't get diagnosed until late.
That's right.
Why?
So it's got more than a 97% death rate, and I got a worse than average diagnosis because your pancreas isn't very important. And so oncologists often joke that cancer is a stealthy disease. It's a real and it tries to find ways to hurt you bad. And it can hide and linger in the pancreas because you don't need your pancreas very much. We need some digestive juices out of it, but if it's not functioning, most people don't have any immediate big problem. So a layman, historian and business strategy guy and wannabe football coach, I have no biological training whatsoever, but I'm a nerd, so I've been going to school on this. The reason that I'm understanding that pancreatic cancer is so fatal is because you're almost never diagnosed with your pancreatic cancer because of its symptoms. You're diagnosed because it's already metastasized to other organs. So I have bad liver cancer, I have vascular stuff, I have a lot of tumors in my spine. So just acknowledging the socially awkward ways that I might sit and move and talk at times because I got a lot of pain from tumors in my spine. But the pancreas is a super fatal kind of cancer, but it also means that it's the places where they're throwing, our scientific experts and community are throwing some of the most interesting brains at the problem of what does it look like to do immunotherapy differently? What does it look like to do really aggressive chemo? So I'm bad enough along that I'm way post-surgical, which is in a way a blessing. You wouldn't want to be at the precipice of, it's probably of no use to have you have this big surgery to take out this one tumor, but let's do it anyway. I'm so full of tumors, you're not going to do surgery to take out one tumor here or there. So we can focus on other stuff. So I'm in a clinical trial at MD Anderson that is about, chemo is just a socially polite way to say poisoning. How do you get the maximum amount of poison delivered to your cancer tumors without also killing and poisoning yourself? And so I'm in a really aggressive chemo trial, and pancreatic cancer tends to be a pretty interesting field if you're a nerd, and I'm gonna be a nerd along the side through this process.
Okay. Here's from your update of January 9th. let me close with prayer requests. And one of the requests that you pose, that I will be able, to borrow the old Puritan phrase, to redeem the time. All right, we have two puzzles there. One is that Ben Sasse is a man of 2026. He is Harvard and Yale and a business consultant and as hip and with it as anybody can be.
We know that stuff's not true, but let's go.
Prayer? What are you talking about, prayer in the year 2026?
I'm with Paul when he says to live is Christ, to die is gain. Obviously, death is a wicked thief. I don't want it to happen, but we're mortals. And it seems like it's not sophisticated or modern or naive to pretend we're not mortals. It's true. And so you got to grapple with big questions. And this is not news to me that I had numbered days. It just became a more precise number. We all have numbered days.
We all have numbered days, which is why you have been so much on my mind ever since posting this, because of course, nobody gets out of here alive. Which brings me to the next question. Redeem the time. That sounds wonderful, but I want to know quite what you mean. It sounds like the kind of thing that we should all be trying to do every day anyway, but don't. What do you mean by it?
Yeah, I have a podcast that's going to be launched in a couple of weeks that I'd been deliberating with some buddies on for 7 years, and multiple times let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and we never got it off the ground. And then we decided in October to do it. And then in December, when I was diagnosed, we decided to still do it. We just changed the name to Monty Python's famous Not Dead Yet. If you're not dead yet, you may as well redeem the time. But that isn't just me, it's all your listeners too. Redeem the time in my theology means it is a great blessing to be able to live a life of gratitude to God by doing stuff that tries to benefit your neighbor. It is a blessing to get to be co-creators, but we don't build any storehouses that last. The things that matter and endure are human souls and things way bigger than any of my projects. That doesn't mean we should be neither triumphalist nor despairing, right? Like nothing we build is going to last, but that doesn't mean nothing matters. The chance to love your neighbor and serve is a blessing, and that's what the Puritans meant by redeem the time. I was given 90 days to live in mid-December. I got into this clinical trial. It's really aggressive. We'll live a lot longer than 90 days, but don't know how many months that is. But whether you have 90 days or 12 months or 12 years or 75 years left to live, we're all going to be pushing up daisies. And so it seems like trying to figure out what the important things are, what the eternal questions you need to wrestle through, what it looks like to see the relationship between sin and death in a broken world. And yet the chance to hug on my wife this morning and to love my kids and to reflect on some important questions with my friend Peter, those are pretty good ways to redeem the time.
Okay. This is not in your nature, but looking back, you devoted almost a decade to politics. Worthwhile?
Theoretically, absolutely. There is no doubt that a framework for ordered liberty is necessary. Power and coercion and restraint of evil are not the center of anybody's lives, or they shouldn't be. The worldview is pretty distorted if politics can become the central thing. And yet, because the world is broken, it's important work. And I truly believe that those of us who get the chance to grow up in America, the constitutional system, the Constitution is the most important political document ever written. Political documents aren't the most important documents, but of political documents, the Constitution is amazing because it says that government is not the author or the source of our rights. We have our rights from God via nature, pre-governmentally, and government is just a shared project. It's a secular project to secure those rights and pass them on to the next generation. So government in general is important. Let's have 1 or 2 cheers for politics, neither 0 nor 3. maybe a way to think about the historic divide on the American political continuum is the right side. Conservatives used to be one-cheer folks and Democrats used to be two-cheer folks, but they're both legitimate American positions because they're neither zero, pretending the world isn't broken, or three, a statism that pretends power and coercion could be the center of your worldview. So theoretically, absolutely. Much longer set of questions about whether 2014 to 2023 were a very fruitful time in American life, and at 2040 or 2050 will we look back and say that we were in the process of preserving important stuff and building important stuff, or were we kind of going through a weird, I'll stop and give you the floor back.
No.
But I do think it's highly likely at some point in the future when America has either declined or hopefully reformed itself, one of the things we're going to think we did is we figured out how to do politics in an era of disintermediated conversation. We don't have a lot of shared facts. We have gazillions of people screaming all the time on the internet, and we pretend they're representative. They're not at all representative. The loudest people have the most ridiculously outsized voice in American life. And it used to just be the left, the far left, that had a bunch of people who were post-constitutional or post-liberal, as in post-classically liberal. Now we have a bunch of people at the right end of the spectrum that are also post-constitutional or post-liberal. I don't think those people are representative of America, but we don't know how to have a conversation right now because we give all the voice to the loudest, angriest people. Most people aren't that angry.
What about the Senate? You gave a big part of your life to the Senate. We're just a few blocks from the chamber where there are a lot of men up there, men and women who remember you fondly as a colleague. Here's you. This is, I'm going to quote you from your appearance last year with Andrew Roberts on his podcast. When I was running for office in 2013 and 2014, having never run for anything before in my life, I would talk constantly about executive or judicial overreach. And those are big problems, no doubt. But the much bigger problem is legislative underreach. I think the founders would be stunned to find the branches that aren't jealous of their prerogative are the House and Senate. Congress is incredibly weak and dysfunctional. What can they do about it? What can we do about it?
Yeah, so I stand by all that. I think let's say something first about if the founders could be transported 2.5 centuries into the future and observe this, how they might reflect on it. But then your question, what can we do about it? The founders believed you needed to divide government's power over and over and over and over, because if men were angels, you wouldn't need government. And if governors were angels, you wouldn't need checks on power. But because we're sinners, because we're broken, because we're selfish, we do need government. But we need the governors to also be constrained. And so they divided over and over. It's just great civics, right? Private sector is more important than the public sector. Of the public sector, what happens closest to the people is more important. State and locals are more important than what happens way off in Washington, D.C. Of what happens in Washington, D.C., let's divide power 3 ways. We'll have a Article 1, legislature, Article 2, executive branch, Article 3, judiciary. They're kind of co-equal branches, but the legislature is the preeminent branch. So let's divide them as well. Let's divide the legislature between the House and the Senate, and let's have the Senate, which is supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world, with all these anti-majoritarian constraints. So government can only act over the course of years. You got to be able to get through a Congress. A Congress means meeting every 2 years in the House. But the Senate is a perpetual body where you're a 6-year term, so only 1/3 of the people are turning over every 2 years. It's supposed to be really hard to do stuff. They did that because they assumed the people who would serve there would want to do stuff. They thought the 3 branches would be jealous for their prerogatives and they'd be ambitious for power. And so you do a ton of stuff, and so you need to constrain government. Super strange that the legislature mostly, and there are lots of good people there, and so even some people that I'm going to criticize their behavior, I won't, not by name, but they're caught in a system where we have a big collective action problem where most of the people in the legislature really just wish they were TikTok stars. And so what they're trying to do is find a platform to grandstand. They don't really want to do stuff legislatively. And so we don't pass anything. Over the course of a given 2-year Congress, about 11,000 pieces of legislation will be introduced. On average, about 380 pass, so 3.5%. Half of that 3.5% are post office naming bills, right? So we're passing like 1.6, 1.7, 1.8% of legislation that's introduced. In the last 44 years, I think there's only been a budget that has spent more than a third of the public's dollars on an appropriated normal process 4 times in 44 years. That's why we go through this BS every September 28, 29, 30. Oh my gosh, the government's going to shut down. What should we do? Should we fund the government at 0% of last year or at 102% of last year across every program? What idiot would do that? No household, no business, no not-for-profit would say, I should spend $0 next year, or every single dollar I spent last year was really well spent. Let's spend just a little bit more in all those categories. That's what we do every year with the continuing resolution, because they don't actually pass any budgets. And the Congress is filled with folks who are so desperate to keep that job that they don't want to do anything that upsets anybody, so nobody takes any risk. And why don't we just figure out a way to do, how do we do a quick take to say it was the other party's side that nothing happened, when both sides are pretty happy to do nothing and say the other side is the reason why. So what do we do about it? You got to elect different kind of people who are super skeptical of politics, not people who spent their whole life trying to get to Washington, but people who view it kind of Cincinnati style or George Washington style as, I got to serve for a term, but man, I want to get back to Mount Vernon. I want to get back to my vineyard and my family and my grandkids. I do not want to move to Washington, D.C. for the rest of my life. We can have a debate about term limits, but the more interesting thing would be if the voters self-consciously only wanted to elect people who kind of wanted to self-term limit because they didn't want to be here forever. Weirdos want to be here forever.
Higher education.
Another non-political topic.
Well, years to earn your doctorate at Yale, 4 years as president of Midland University, a small Lutheran college in Fremont, Nebraska, then your time as president of the University of Florida. Add this all up, and I get you devoted about a decade of your life to higher education. Again, from the perspective of your current situation, worthwhile? Were those years well spent? What seems more? I guess what I'm getting at is, now that you hear the clock ticking, what seems more valuable and what seems less valuable than it did before the diagnosis?
I'll make a joke.
Fair.
I'll make a joke. I'll say a really serious thing, and then I'll try to answer your question. The joke is my dream job
only you.
My dream job was to be a graduate assistant and eventually become a part of the offensive staff at the University of Nebraska football program. And I should have pursued that directly because I'm annoying and relentless. And if I'd have really gone for it, I'd be a football coach today like my dad was. And I think that would have been a better choice. But anyway, the really big point you hear when the clock is ticking, not to go, full cats in the cradle, but, I just want to say, man to man, human to human, parent to parent in front of your audience, like the workaholism in my soul is something I've repented of to my family, but I'm happy to say, not happy, I'm embarrassed, but comforted to say publicly, what a mistake in my 20s and 30s to be so focused on a lot of work ambition that I just made way too many stupid decisions to be on the road too many nights per month and per year. And so if I had it to do over again, I would think a lot more intentionally about how to be more ambitious in my household and to take the Lord's Day and the Sabbath more seriously than all the ways I was a workaholic for decades. I was repenting of this and reforming the process well before the metastasized cancer diagnosis, but I just, wish in my 20s and 30s I'd have done a little better job at balance on work home.
To bring our listeners along, in your 20s and 30s, you got this doctorate at Yale, and then instead of going directly into academia, you became a business consultant, and you were on the road constantly, and that lasted for some years, didn't it?
Yeah, I did.
And then you went to Midland, Midland University and became president there, correct?
Yeah, I had two work paths. I could see, wave of nausea. I could see that the digital revolution was going to disrupt almost every vertical. Like almost all sectors were going to get disrupted. And Max Weber has the great distinction between entrepreneurial and bureaucratic management. Bureaucratic has a negative connotation for lots of legitimate reasons, but in one sense, bureaucratic just means maintaining or sustaining institutions that we have that are important. Entrepreneurial, from the French shifter of resources, is making changes in your strategy or what you're doing. So I did I did strategy consulting, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey and Company, private equity. But I also was a nerd and I wanted to read books in common with people. So I got a PhD in American history, not because I ever planned to be an academic, but just because I wanted to read books. I didn't want to write a dissertation really, but I wanted to go read a couple hundred books together around a seminar table with people. And so for a while in my life, I kind of had two full-time jobs. I was on an academic path as a grad student and junior instructor at Yale, and then later taught at the University of Texas in Austin. And I was also doing strategy consulting on the side. So for a decade and a half, I kind of worked two jobs. And friends I have who've been road warriors kind of have the theory that if you're away less than 7 nights a month, things can still work pretty well at home. If you're away 8, 9, 10 nights a month or more, that becomes 2 or 3 nights a week, it's too much. And I regularly traveled more than 7 or 10 nights a month. And so I have a lot of regret about that. So the point I was just making is you were comparing one job calling with another job calling.
Yes.
The bigger set of, Solomonic ain't the right word, but 53-year-old, but on your deathbed, 53-year-old wisdom I have is work-home balance matters a lot. Have a thick community, be from a place. We bought cemetery plots early in life. I've known for a long time where I was going to be buried in St. Paul Lutheran Church Road in Arlington, Nebraska, over the Elkhorn River. Death is terrible, but the cemetery is beautiful. We've known the rootedness of where our family convenes for all the holidays, but we didn't spend enough hours every month doing that. So I have regret about that. To your question, academia versus politics. Politics matters, but in my 9 years in politics, a little more if you count living on a campaign bus for a year and a half, I was always willing to say what I believe to voters, even if it might make me unpopular. I have the weird claim to fame of being by far the highest vote getter in the history of Nebraska, and also by far the most sanctioned person in the history of Nebraska. My guess is second or third most sanctioned person in Nebraska has been sanctioned by their party 3 or 4 or 5 times. 63 times state parties in Nebraska convened to condemn me for not being aligned with President Trump on issue X or whatever.
63 times?
I have 63 censures.
I had noticed some of those stories, but not 63 of them.
But what's crazy, I don't mean this to be self-serving, this is my point about a bell curve distribution. Most of America is center-right, and they want politics to do a limited number of things, do it well, get its job done, and stop pretending you want to be Hollywood. Washington is Hollywood for ugly people. Shut up, do your service, and get off the stage. And regular folks liked my approach to politics, and so I'm glad for the ways that we went and said normie things. Go to more town halls, but roll your eyes. Don't pretend that politics is the center of the world. The center of the world is where you're raising your kids. It's where you worship. It's where you go to work next to somebody on the line for decades or on the farm next door. And so politics is really important, but right now we're going through a phase where our politics is so politainment, where a very small number of people are paying attention, but those people are making it the center of their life. They're overrepresented. We need a lot more normies to come back in and engage in politics a little bit. And so if I were going to do more politics, I would want to, back then, I would want to make that case more aggressively that we need to resist the weirdoification of politics, which is what happens when Twitter and Instagram capture a political score. We know that only 14% of Americans are paying attention to politics on a daily basis, and only 29% pay attention at all. 71% are disengaged. We got to get
Those
the
71 are the good
50th
people.
and the 60th and the 40th percentile person to engage in politics a little bit. Higher ed has more import because we're going through a phase of having to help 15 to 18 to 21 to 24-year-olds prepare for life, both work, vocational, so paid vocational stuff, and the rest of life, not just once, but for a world where we're going to have disruption over and over and over and over.
Okay, so you spent a year and some months as president of the University of Florida. One of the things that you did was bring your old friend. As I recall, you were close friends. You got your Yale doctorates in history together. You brought your old friend Will Inboden to the University of Florida and put him at the, what was it called? The
Hamilton School.
Hamilton School, and started moving, reforming, showing the way the two of you believed a modern American university should look. Things have happened to you Will is now provost at the University of Texas, which is a much bigger operation than Hamilton was. He's serious about reform. Can it be done? Can it be done?
He has a good team and a good project. So Jim Davis, president of the University of Texas, the board of regents at Texas, the political leadership have done a lot of things to set the table and given Will a really interesting platform and project. Will is provost and executive vice president of UT, and they're trying to reform the curriculum in ways that need to be reformed. If you look at what's happened with majors, students' selection of majors over the last 40 or 50 years, 4 decades in a row, students have migrated from the humanities and the liberal arts into the STEM disciplines. And at a level of pre-vocational stuff, that is probably the right choice for lots of people to be making as a rational job-seeking strategy. But having the luxury of going to a great American university for 4 years is about more than just pre-vocational stuff. It's about a chance to prepare for citizenship and life as well, to fall in love with the good and the true and the beautiful, and to prepare for your job and for your third job in some industry that doesn't even exist now, 20 years from now. It makes sense for students to be migrating toward quantitative disciplines or toward digital revolution and STEM disciplines. That doesn't mean the humanities and liberal arts don't matter, but what's happened at most universities is the people, not all of them, and they're not all bad folks, even those that are advocating for a strategy that I don't support, but there are a lot of people who've nichified their disciplines in the humanities and the liberal arts in ways that are not about big questions. They're not about goodness, truth, or beauty, and they're not about preparing people for any work. They're just about ideological capture of a lot of stupid little niches to write a dissertation read by dozens, tops, and then have forced demand through the curriculum. There's no reason to do that. There's no reason the taxpayers of the state of Texas or the state of Nebraska or the state of Florida should subsidize somebody to teach in a discipline that isn't wrestling with big questions and isn't preparing people for work. And so one of the things that Will is doing that I think is really beautiful is asking some fundamental questions about what does it look like to have compulsion in the core? Why do we have core classes? It better be because you're preparing people for work or life, or you're wrestling with big questions that lead to research outcomes that benefit the broader public. And if that's not the case, then we ought not give people forced demand. And so Will is rethinking a lot of things, or Will and his leadership and their faculty are rethinking things about what the curriculum is for, and that's exciting.
Okay, so we're coming up on our 250th anniversary. July 4th, 2026 will make it 250 years since that declaration was first published. You said a moment ago we're going through a phase when everybody in Congress wants to be on TikTok, when the wrong kinds of people are paying you called it the weirdos, are paying far too much attention to politics. But what struck me was that you called it a phase. A moment ago you used the word phase once again in connection with universities, that this ideological capture of the great universities, and when we know that you love the country and you love the practice of politics because you spent a decade of your young life at it, and we know that you love university life and you love the life of the mind because you spent a decade at that as well. Do you feel confident that we can get through these phases? Or tell us the truth. This is a moment when you have nothing to lose and nothing to prove. Tell us the truth. Is the country simply in a long-term, permanent decline? And do we all just need to make our accommodation with this collapse that's taking place around us and return all our attention to our homes and our churches and the little schools that are small enough for us to manage?
Well, you framed your question about 3 different ways. So at the very tail,
You choose.
I went long-winded on the last 2 or 3 answers, so I'm not beating up the question. I just don't want to run away from the very last end and imply that the small platoons are less important. So first of all, I do think the places where you raise your kids and the places where you're breaking bread every night and where you worship and where you work, I do think those are the most important places, not the least important places, but I know you mean both and so do I. And so at the level of big national callings, maybe there's an institutional component to the way to think about it, and there's an attention span component for how to think about it. We definitely gonna have to build new institutions, right? This is analogous to 1870 to 1920, mass urbanization, immigration, and industrialization changed American life in ways that people assumed the polity of New England town greens couldn't go on if you have big cities. And from 1870 to 1890, cities were pretty terrible. There wasn't really a reason to want to move to a city and raise your kids there. There were factories pulling economic activity there, and technological development on the farm meant we didn't need as many people working on the farm. So you had push off the farm and you had pull to the cities, but the cities weren't a great place from 1870 to 1890. By 1910, 1915, 1920, cities can be a great place to raise a family. There were urban ethnic neighborhoods that had a density of community, Tocquevillian thickness around them in the cities that was similar to what we used to know on the New England town green, and America was going to go on again, even though in 1875, you didn't know if America would go on. We have a similar problem today, except much bigger. The agrarian to industrial phase, that transition, is much smaller than the industrial to, what do we call this? The knowledge economy, the digital economy, the IT economy. Sociologists call it the post-industrial economy, which is another way of saying we don't know what the hell it is. We had agrarian, we had hunter-gatherers, nomads, we had agrarianism, we had industrialization, and now we have post-industrialization because we don't know what it is. So your question is, where do we go from here? We don't know, but 50 or 75 or 100 years from now, when you look back at our moment, we're mostly not going to talk about our politics. We're going to believe we were living through a technological revolution that created economic and cultural revolutions that way downstream from that had political consequences. Politics can't possibly fix this. It's a tail being wagged by technology, culture, and economics. But America only works if people are deliberative, if people are thoughtful, if people say, my neighbor, my soul matters, my kid's soul matters, but my neighbor's soul matters too. So I want to have a polity that works, but I know that you can't compel a soul. So power isn't the main thing. Our loves are the main thing. What George Washington, Lincoln later built upon it, but Washington's silver frame with the golden apple, politics is just the frame. The center of the frame can't be power or coercion or compulsion. It's your loves, it's your affections, it's your passion projects, it's your pursuits. And right now, why I call it a phase is because Americans don't read anymore. This is not some 53-year-old, hey, you're on your deathbed, so act 90. What's the matter with kids today? Why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? It's not a get off my lawn speech. It's not something that people said in 1940 and 1960 and 1980. Literally, we don't read anymore. Like we have the data. The vast majority of Americans won't come anywhere near reading a book in the year 2026. And so the shortening of our attention spans to digital clips and shorts, it doesn't work for a deliberative republic that is anti-majoritarian, that says, I believe in freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, protest, or redress of grievances, because these things are about souls, and souls are more important than things that can just be governed by power. And so I'll stop with this, but if we succeed, it will be because we learned how to be deliberative, despite having these digital tools can be awesome, but they can also be a hellscape. Like people ask me all the time when I was still on the speaker circuit, is the digital revolution going to bring heaven or is the digital revolution going to bring hell? Yes. The only right answer is it's going to bring everything humans do faster. The good stuff, more of it faster. The bad stuff, more of it faster. But you would never think that the digital revolution would cause a collapse in sex, but we know it's happening. There's almost no sex in America. There's less premarital sex, there's less marital sex, there's less extramarital sex. The only increase in sex is like there's some 70-year-old rich dudes who have Viagra who have a tick more sex. But in general, there's a crap ton less sex everywhere in American life. And it's because a porn revolution has made it way easier for people to be satisfied, not really, but to be short-term satisfied without having to go through all the work of having communion and relationship with another human who's annoying. And so like sex is great. And the digital revolution has created something that has made us all bored by sex. That's weird. You told me to YOLO, so I'll just put it out there.
YOLO. Cynthia Ozick. Cynthia Ozick is 97 years old. This is some famous novelist, very wise woman. someone who lived through the Depression, the Second World War, the protests and riots and stagflation of the 1970s. And this is what Cynthia Ozick said in a recent interview. This is my last question about the country.
And then we'll do more on sex?
On you, yeah, exactly. Then we'll get to the sex show. Would you please, I thought you might be a little bit subdued, not a bit of it, zero.
Attention span problems.
All right. So I want to know if you have an answer to her. This is Cynthia Ozick, this wise 97-year-old woman in a recent interview. This is a good country. It's a great country. And now it's disintegrating. How do you answer that?
Well, President Reagan had the line that in a republic, you're always only one generation away from the extinction of freedom because it can't go forward in the bloodstream in a republic. The people have to believe it, and therefore you have to pass it on. We're a creedal nation. To say that government isn't the author or source of our rights, it's true, but it is a weird thing in human history to believe that. Nations haven't believed that. They've believed things about their tribe, and maybe the people right next door to them were not thought to be truly evil, but they sure as heck couldn't be trusted. And so government was just about power. We believe this crazy creedal thing, which is universal human dignity. People are created with dignity. They're endowed by their creator with inalienable rights. Among these are life and liberty, but also the right to pursue happiness, even in ways that I don't agree with. Freedom of religion is a crazy interesting thing because all religionists, even if we disagree with each other, agree against the status that you can't compel souls. And so I want to defend somebody else's religious liberty, even if I don't agree with their theology, because I think the freedom to wrestle with ideas includes the right and freedom to publish those ideas. It includes the right and freedom to assemble for worship. And so if you believe those creedal things about human dignity, you have to pass them on. And your nonagenarian is definitely right that we've not been doing any of that. We haven't done basic civics for a really long time. This is not a digital revolution problem. The digital revolution just intensifies our distraction. But in some ways, America becomes the global preeminent power during World War II. We have an amazing run in the immediate post-war period. And by the 1960s, we get into kind of an adolescent crisis as a nation. And we have so much affluenza, we're so rich, that we end up in culture wars. Some of it is super important culture wars about finishing the civil rights movement and undoing Jim Crow. But a lot of what happens in the late 60s is just licentiousness as well. And we go through a period of the 70s where it feels like America might be coming apart. And in the 80s, we get our stuff back together, but not really because we reaffirm all the creedal stuff. We're just in an existential crisis in the Cold War, and we have a great leader, and Reagan leads us out of it. And our economy triumphs, and our politics and geopolitics triumph. And so America becomes the leader of the world again in the 1980s, the way we had been in the 1940s. And it brings a temporary American détente about our culture war of the 60s. But one of the things we decided to do is say, well, let's all just be really materialistic together. And as long as everybody's getting rich, maybe we don't really need to affirm these creedal things. And so I think we're 50-ish, 60 years into not having done the creedal transmission that a small r republic requires. And the digital revolution makes it a lot easier to both distract ourselves with abundance, which turns out to be like, the sugar high of Vegas. It might be fun for a weekend. It might be great for the opening weekend of March Madness, but you don't really want to live in a casino. And a lot of our culture has decided, well, if we all just live in a casino, maybe we don't have to wrestle through any of the big questions. And then on top of that, we created a digital revolution where it says, you don't even have to know your neighbors. You can just create an ideological little echo chamber around you, and you can believe that whatever weird stuff you believe, you can just believe with a couple dozen other people, and they'll self-affirm you, and we don't have to do national American civic stuff together. We got to do that stuff together.
So what you're saying, this is from your book, The Vanishing American Adult. Material abundance can make us freer and less dependent, but simultaneously more lonely and isolated. It is very difficult for a rich republic to remain virtuous. And here's a recent quotation from Elon Musk, and he's talking about the emergence of AI and robotics. I'm quoting Elon Musk, AI and robots will make everyone wealthier than the richest person on earth. Okay, So what you're saying, I think, I want to sum up my understanding of what you're saying, and then you correct it. What you're saying is we are moving very quickly into a period of such abundance that our own individual choices, the question of free will, the question of what will we choose to do, will be more important than it has ever been, because abundance taken care of. We'll have education. If you want to get yourself educated, you'll have computers you'll be able to be educated better than kings were educated. But Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. Aristotle doesn't know all that is available to students today. And we could choose to become a nation that in effect sits in the basement playing video games and watching porn, or we can choose to what? What is the aspirational choice? What can we as a nation aspire to? At the other end of this, what ought we to hope that it looks like?
I'm glad we have another hour together, because we can do freedom from, freedom to. We can do knowledge and / versus character. We can do inculcating a work ethic. There's a lot about Elon that I like. I don't know him well, but there's a lot about him that I like. There's a lot about his worldview that's just so ridiculously immature. At the end of the day, freedom from certain kinds of constraint is really important, but it's to get to the freedom to questions. At the end of the day, we haven't been short of knowledge for a really long time. I wish we had more knowledge about how to cure pancreatic cancer. There are lots of subcategories of knowledge we need more of. But at the end of the day, when you're thinking about raising a 12 or a 14 or a 16-year-old, is the problem that you think they're not going to have enough money, or that they're not going to have enough work ethic? I'm only worried about the second question. There aren't material constraints in the world, ultimately. We got 8 billion people in the world today. There are about 800 million objectively poor people. It's about 10% of the globe. 200 years ago, there were only 800 million people on Earth, and about 797 million were objectively poor. Right. 99% of people were poor. Today, 10% of people are poor. The constraint in the world is not that there's not enough resources. It's that we don't have enough character, and we don't do self-constraint, self-restraint, self-discipline, self-control well enough. And so what I care about is my kids, and if I were around to be able to see them, my grandkids and your listeners' kids and grandkids growing up where they say, I want to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I want to serve, I want to love my neighbor. I want to learn to die to self. I want to learn to do things that are the right things to do, even when they're hard and they don't feel good. Right now, we've already had a limitless internet for 30 years. Since the mid-1990s, we've had an ability for every kid to get access to all the information that exists on the internet. Well, we know that grade inflation is much higher in the Ivy League and at all of our universities, but objective scores on the SAT are down substantially. So obviously, that's an easily falsifiable proposition that having access to more stuff will lead to better outcomes. The problem is humans don't have the right habits. We're broken and we're selfish. And I need to die to self, and I need to learn to love my neighbor. And that includes my wife and 3 kids who I love more than anybody on earth. But I'm selfish in my behavior with them today, knowing I'm dying soon. And these people are awesome. Of course I'm a selfish jackass to some neighbor, and let alone some anonymous neighbor a couple of miles away. So the idea that the digital revolution is going to make us the richest people any time and place in human history, but we're already that. We're the richest people any time and place in human history. That is not the problem you should be solving for. The problem you should be solving for is the fact that we're all mortals, we're all selfish, and we'd like to have a thicker community and better loves. And that is not going to be solved by being richer. And I say this as a zealously right-wing defender of the market. Market capitalism is the best system that's ever existed. It doesn't mean it's a really good religion.
From a note you sent to a few friends about the way you had to break the news to your family, we focused on what it means to be adopted by a God who is sovereign and for whom there is no maverick molecule or surprise, to our steady rock Father. God is sovereign even over every molecule. Has that become harder or easier to believe?
The same. I'm not, there's never been a piece of me that has doubted the question, is God surprised by the fact that Ben Sasse's torso is chock full of tumors? That would be the God who'd be surprised by it is way too small to be interesting. God is not surprised by the fact that I'm going to die, but we're all going to die. And the question is, what's the use of that phase? Tim Keller, Presbyterian pastor I used to know in New York, who died of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, maybe 3 years now. He fought through pancreatic cancer for 2.5 years, and the death rate in the first 12 months is super high. So him lasting 2.5 years was big. And Tim told a group of folks, he said, I hate pancreatic cancer. I would never want pancreatic cancer to exist, but I also wouldn't want to go back to a phase in my life where I hadn't known the prayer of pancreatic cancer.
Prayer of
I
pancreatic cancer.
don't want to get too serious, and we've done a lot of politics and theology and Elon's sort of weird jukebox life. I won't get too serious on you, but I've been diagnosed for 7 weeks. For about 2 months before that, it was obvious that something was really wrong in my body, and we couldn't figure out what it was. But now as I mentioned, I'm on a ton of morphine. And so it takes away a lot of the pain from the tumors that are in and around my spine. But for the period before I started on the morphine, I was having a rough go of it. The desperation of that pain, the regrets I've had to wrestle through in the time of realizing that I wish I had served my wife and kids better. I wish there were things in their character that were farther along, and the stuff you can see that, man, that's clunky behavior. You look a lot like your dad. When you feel those regrets, or when you are just bored, it sounds victim-y, and I definitely don't want to do that. But at sleeping 15 or 16 hours a day right now because of all the drugs that I'm on, there's just a lot of time in a hospital bed or convalescing when you get out of the hospital every week. I'm in and out of the hospital every week. I'm just bored out of my mind. And those, which is a question about recognizing the futility of my efforts. Like, there was a time when I wasn't as bored because I could delude myself into believing my projects were going to build a storehouse that lasted. That self-importance, the regrets about love and service, and the pain, all those lead you to pray in a different way, because you have to acknowledge your finitude in a way that there's just a hell of a lot less room for bullshit.
So I wouldn't do this if you weren't a friend, and I also wouldn't do it if you weren't you, but I think you may be able to answer the question. There's a bit in the Bible. Actually, it's the shortest verse in the entire Bible, so you already know where I'm going with this. And I've always wondered about it. So here we are. Jesus arrives at the tomb of Lazarus, his friend who has just died. And in a moment, he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And by the way, Martha, Lazarus' sister, comes running up and says, if you had gotten here a couple of days earlier, he would never have died. And but then we have Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. So he knows that we suffer, and he suffers through it. What is the point? It's still constructed to permit us to suffer. Why? This is the problem of pain. I know that it's such a permanent problem. I know that every philosopher and every junior philosopher has always addressed it so that it seems that you can't talk about it without sounding trite. But it bothers me.
It feels real to talk about it right now when I'm having a radiating set of pain out of a tumor in my spine. Pain is real, so it seems like the first thing humans should do is acknowledge that a lot is broken in this world. The existence of death is surely not the way it's supposed to be. So Jesus weeping, what a gift. First of all, the story is amazing. The whole Lazarus story and his sister's weirdly narcissistic behavior. That's us, right? Like we're dying in the story too. We're many of the characters, but we're definitely that egotistical, self-absorbed, Jesus, why didn't you do it the way I want you to do it? But to our point about short attention spans, first, let's just go back and read that story and a dozen adjacent stories. The Bible is so rich and we spend so little time reading it together. Jesus weeps there and he knows that he's going to raise Lazarus 5 minutes later. So it's an amazing story because he's acknowledging that death is terrible and yet death doesn't win. The Christian phrase in Christian literature for years has been to call death the last enemy. Jesus wept, 2 words, last enemy, 2 words, pretty great. Death is a wicked thief. It's an enemy, but it's pretty great that it's the last enemy. All the stuff that I regret for having been an inadequate husband and son and father and friend and worker, truth teller, all the stuff that I've been weak on, I'm going to be freed from all of that. Death is the last enemy.
All right. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. You're a far better human being than I am.
That's BS.
But I can... Just this morning, I was reading something about somebody I knew 40 years ago, and I thought, that son of a bitch is... I thought, I'm carrying grudges from 4 decades. Do you find yourself...
Just to push back at the idea that I'm a better person than you, here's how big of a douche I am. I want to know who the guy was and hear the story. Okay, keep going.
You'll know who he is, and I'll tell you later. Do you find yourself able to let go of... People have done nasty things to you, and you're in your political life. You write that you received death threats, and people threw things on you. People behaved badly to you, but are you able to let certain things go?
I'm wrestling through it. The healthy thing for me is that every time there's somebody I don't want to forgive for something, my wife has been really good at reminding me. There's a log in your own eye, the passage, but it fits in almost every instance. She's like, let's parse what that person did wrong to you that you want to still be polishing your little grievance. She's like, I got some things you did that are analogous and worse. I'm not earning my forgiveness by forgiving, but I do want to forgive because I've been forgiven. So there's still some people I'm wrestling through it on. But.
So that's and do you feel forgiven?
Yeah.
You do feel it. It's real to you.
To whom else would I go? Like there's nothing in Christian theology proper. There's a distinction between imputation and atonement. Atonement is taking away our sins, but imputation is getting credit for all the righteous stuff I never did. And I never did anything that's righteous enough. I never did anything that wasn't tainted by selfishness. I love my wife more than anything. And yet, at times when I ask a question of her, both to have her feel heard and loved and respected, but also because I kind of hope she'll flip that question back to me and I'm ready to talk again. Enough about you, more about me. Like everything we do is still selfish. It's tainted. And so it isn't just being forgiven. It's knowing that I need the imputed righteousness of Christ.
Last question. You published an update on X on January 9th, in which you got off a line. I don't want to trade places with you. I really don't want to trade places with you, but I wish I'd written this line myself. That's how good it is. You can play a lot of basketball in the last 60 seconds. What do you still want to get done?
This has been fun. Thank you for having me. Good to see you. My girls are 24 and 22, and our wonderful providential surprise is a decade younger. So our boy is only 14, and when you get a precise date on how soon you're going to die, I went through the question of, if I can fight to get into a clinical trial and a lot of what'll happen in that hospital is going to be kind of nasty, why do you really want to do it? And I felt a duty to try to get into a clinical trial and to fight to live a little while longer, chiefly because I have a young kid still at home and he needs a dad to slap him upside the head a little bit longer and give him some advice and wrestle through some questions and help him recognize that he's going to need to be a man earlier than those of us who were blessed to have a dad in our lives a lot longer did. So I want to be a good dad for longer, but there's also some stuff that you'd like to find a way to write about and talk about a little bit. I'm not self-important and thinking I have any great insights, but it is a luxury to hold moderately to the things of this world, to want to shatter the temptation to make this worldly projects idols, but also to not be despondent and resigned. It seems to me the right way to approach most of culture building and institutional preservation is as a 1 or 2 cheers moderate. And if there's some questions I can reflect on in those areas as we, as a community and as a people, get through the digital revolution and have to build new kinds of institutions. Bill Gates has the line, every revolution that's ever come before has been intergenerational. What we're living through right now really might be the first intra-generational revolution ever. If you think about industrialization, I know we're wrapping, but if you think about our 1870 point, it wasn't a 30-year-old farmer and his wife saying, we can't farm anymore, we have to move to the city. It was a 30-year-old guy and gal realizing that their 8 and 7-year-old kids weren't going to farm that land. They were going to have to move to the city. It really did have a generational 20-year gap. We're going through something where the marginal cost of quantification is really going to fall either to zero or so close to zero, we're not going to bother metering it anymore. So Elon's point, we're going to be the richest people any time and place in human history, is another way of saying anything that can be reduced to a series of steps, we're probably going to reduce to a series of steps. It's probably going to become free and ubiquitous. We're probably all going to have a robot working for us that builds other robots. That's both awesome and horrible at the same time. It's awesome at the level of solving problems. It's horrible at the fact that humans are made to solve problems. And we need to figure out how to do meaningful stuff with our time. Consumption isn't enough. We're meant to be workers and producers. And wrestling through those questions a little bit with some friends seems like a useful way to spend some weeks or months.
You are in clinical trials at MD Anderson. You are also writing for the new Wall Street Journal newsletter, Free Expression. And your podcast is going to launch when?
Next month.
Next month. And it will be called?
Not Dead Yet.
All right. You sent around a couple days before Christmas, you sent to some friends a poem called Ring Out Wild Bells. It comes from Tennyson's much longer work In Memoriam, in which Tennyson reflects on the death of his young friend Arthur Hallam at the age of 22. And the poem you sent to your friends is a meditation on New Year's Eve. Would you close our conversation by reading a few stanzas?
This is fun. Death is evil, but death doesn't get the final word. Ring out wild bells to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the grief that saps the mind, for those that here we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor. Ring in redress to all mankind. Ring out the want, the care, the sin, the faithless coldness of the times. Ring out my mournful rhymes, but ring the fuller minstrel in. Ring out old shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the 1,000 wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace. Ring in the valiant man and free, the larger heart, the kindlier hand. Ring out the darkness of the land. ring in the Christ that is to be.
Benjamin Eric Sasse, thank you.
Thanks, brother.
For Uncommon Knowledge, the Hoover Institution, and Fox News, I am Peter Robinson. You bastard, you got me choked up. You and Tennyson.
I wanted to. That was fun. Thank you for thinking of that. I hadn't thought of that.